My pulse beat a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Commander Relax had been crystal clear about the mission's importance. My task: infiltrate Earth, assess their technology level, and determine any potential threats to our home planet, Xyla. It was a routine assignment, the kind every junior officer cut their teeth on, but something coiled tight with anxiety in my stomach. This was my first time operating alone. Xylarian scouts typically worked in pairs to reduce the risk of capture and compromise vital intel. A freak hyperspace storm had separated me from my partner, Lyra, and the emergency beacon on my escape pod was defunct. I was on my own. A sharp hiss broke the monotony of the pod's soft hum. I lunged for the control panel, heart pounding. A dozen flashing icons greeted me, half of them in the harsh crimson of critical error codes. My training kicked in. I checked oxygen levels first: stable. Life support intact. Next, navigation. The sensors were spitting nonsense. No reliable course, no communication frequencies, no estimated location. Dread prickled down my spine. I'd heard the stories pilots ejected into empty space, left adrift until their supplies ran out. A slow, bleak end. Frantically, I started manually searching for known beacon frequencies, hoping to find Lyra's pod or any nearby Xylarian vessel. Static, the mocking, desolate static of the empty void, was my only reply. My thoughts were a whirlwind. Should I attempt a restart of all systems? Too risky. It could fry what little remained of the controls. Could I use the manual thrusters to push into a more densely populated area of space? Maybe, but if the navigation sensors were corrupted, how would I know if I was flying deeper into oblivion? And every ounce of fuel might be the difference between life and that slow, agonizing end. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I jerked awake, my mind fogged and a metallic tang in my mouth. Dehydrated. My water supply indicator blinked an angry yellow. Rations were already low. Surviving any meaningful length of time was going to be a battle against dwindling resources. A wave of self-reproach washed over me. I should have gone over the pod's readiness with more care. Lyra had always teased me about my obsessive checklists. Maybe this was my comeuppance. But anger bubbled beneath the tide of misery. I was Xylarian, trained since birth for this work. Our ships, our tech, were the pinnacle of the 7 galaxies. This shouldn't be happening. To me, of all people. I needed a distraction, something to occupy my hands and my mind. There was a small maintenance toolkit on board, meant for basic repairs during missions. Maybe I could dismantle something, see if the parts might be reconfigured into a rudimentary beacon if the main transmitter was completely down. I could send an SOS on a broad spectrum, pray someone, anyone, caught it. With newfound determination, I tore into the toolkit and then into the pod's meager storage panels. I scavenged wires, sensor lenses, power couplings. For hours, my cramped quarters echoed with the clatter of metal upon metal. By the third rotation, I held a pathetic mess of circuitry in my hands. It wasn't elegant, far from the polished equipment back home. But with a flick of a switch, a tiny diode flickered to life. A beacon, weak and pathetic, but it was a beacon nonetheless. Hope, that stubborn weed, bloomed in me. I wasn't floating to my doom anymore. I was fighting back. I fiddled with the couplings, nudging wires into place, trying to amplify the signal, boost its range. My fingers grew stiff and clumsy. I swore under my breath each time the fickle light sputtered and died. Days blurred into weeks. My routine was a dance against despair: work on my makeshift beacon, eat a flavorless ration bar, check the oxygen, try to coax any signal, sleep, and repeat. The silence was a constant companion, broken only by my own shallow breaths and the soft whir of the failing life support. My beacon flickered, casting long, dancing shadows over the cramped interior of the pod. It had become both my salvation and my torment. Each time it stuttered, a cold hand squeezed my heart. I'd started talking to myself. At first, murmured words of encouragement, technical instructions muttered under my breath. It quickly became more. I'd recount Xylarian folktales, describe the lush gardens of my home city, or argue politics with imaginary voices that never argued back. I wondered if this was the first sign of madness, the cracks appearing before the whole structure crumbled. My dreams weren't a respite either. They were vivid and disorienting. Sometimes, I was chasing Lyra through twisting, unfamiliar corridors. Others, I was back home, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, only to have my family's faces dissolve into pixelated blurs. I'd jolt awake, shivering and disoriented with the taste of tears in my mouth. One rotation, as I finally drifted into a troubled sleep, An insistent beeping dragged me back. My eyes snapped open, and my heart lodged in my throat. It wasn't my beacon, nor any alarm from the pod. This was new, a rhythmic pulse echoing through the comm system. I scrambled to the controls, fingers clumsy with a mix of terror and hope that made my hands tremble. The source of the transmission was impossibly distant, but it was clear, a repeating distress call on an archaic frequency. A human one if I wasn't mistaken. I didn't know if they could receive me, but I had to try. With shaking hands, I configured my beacon to respond with a Xylarian distress code. The silence that followed was crushing. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my breath hitching in my chest. Then the beeps morphed into garbled static, and just when icy disappointment began to creep in, a voice pierced through the crackling distortion. Unidentified craft, this is the Artemis. Do you read? The voice was female, raspy with urgency. A surge of adrenaline washed over me. This is a Xylarian scout vessel. I suffered malfunctions. I need assistance. I tried to keep my voice steady, but a manic laugh threatened to escape my throat. Xylarian? Can you confirm? Are you saying, alien? The human voice had a disbelieving edge to it. Yes. I need assistance. I'm adrift. My beacon chose that moment to sputter and die, plunging me back into darkness and an almost unbearable silence. Hello. Hello. The frantic response from the Artemis echoed in the dead comm link. It faded, leaving me in a buzzing void. Had she heard me? Was it just a cruel trick of my malfunctioning equipment? Despair, my ever-present shadow, curled back in, but the flicker of hope remained. I attacked the beacon with renewed fury, fueled by an irrational desperation. A burst of static startled me, and the voice returned possible. Repeat, Xylarian vessel, do you read? Yes. This is the Xylarian vessel. I repeat, I need assistance. I spoke into the crackling comms as clearly as I could manage. The pod was rattling, losing power in fits and starts. All right, alien, we've got you faint and fading, the woman responded. Her voice was steadier now, tinged with amazement more than disbelief. I'm Commander Rogers. Do you have any way to give coordinates? Navigation is fried. Just tell me how to find you. My heart pounded like a war drum against my ribs. That's going to be a problem. We're not what you'd call on the map. Her voice had a wry tone as if danger was something she breakfasted with. Explain, Commander. I gritted out the words. Artemis is an exploration vessel, way out past where any sane ship should be. It's a long shot, but run a scan for strong, pulsed, radio emissions. We have a beacon from our early days of spaceflight, old tech. A note of hope crept into her tone. It'll be like trying to find a candle flame with a broken telescope, but stranger things have happened. The task seemed an absurdity, like searching for a single raindrop in a storm. Still, it was something, a task to focus on, however faint the odds. I configured the remaining sensors and squinted at the readout, trying to make sense of the mess of squiggles and static. Hours of tense searching yielded nothing but frustration, like a cruel cosmic joke. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, a rhythmic pulse blipped onto the screen. It was faint, barely registering on my instruments, but it was there. I boosted the signal, ignoring the angry flashing warnings about power conservation. There it was again, stronger, persistent. My beacon must have picked up a reflection of Artemis's signal. It was a lifeline. A surge of energy pushed me forward. I recalibrated the manual thrusters, aiming my crippled pod towards the beacon's faint echo. It was the riskiest maneuver I'd ever attempted. If I misjudged, I'd drift deeper into the empty vastness. But inaction had led to this slow spiral towards desperation. I'd rather take a chance at rescue than wait for the cold embrace of space. Each tentative burst from the thrusters felt like a step down a treacherous path. The pod rattled in protest, systems groaning and flickering in warning. Yet the beacon's pulse grew stronger, a rhythmic beacon in the darkness. After rotations of tense navigation, I saw it. A sleek, silver speck against the velvety blackness. It was unmistakable, not the graceful curves of a Xylarian vessel, but a hard-edged, utilitarian design. Yet, it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. A wave of dizziness crashed over me. My oxygen was running perilously low, a fact I'd stubbornly ignored in my desperate flight. My sight tunneled, edges blurring and swirling in nauseating patterns. Yet, I didn't stop. With trembling hands, I nudged the thrusters for one final, agonizingly slow approach. Commander Rogis's surprised voice crackled over the re-established connection. Xylarian, I swear you're the slowest fast approach I've ever seen. Prepare for docking in. Wait, are you breathing okay over there? The human was sharp, and the worry in her voice was a balm on raw nerves. Oxygen is depleted. Request immediate boarding. My voice was barely a wheeze. Hang on, alien, we're moving into position. Artemis out. The Artemis shifted, a slow, careful dance. I could barely make out the glint of metal as a section slid aside and an airlock extended toward my pod. Blackness danced at the edges of my vision, but I clung to consciousness. With the last vestiges of power, I aligned the pod with the airlock. There was a jolt, hiss of atmospheres equalizing, and then, silence. I slumped backward, blackness finally claiming me. I awoke with a violent gasp as if coughed back to life. My breaths were ragged, my head throbbing. Rough fabric scratched against my skin, and strange, medicinal smells assaulted my nose. But I was breathing. Truly breathing. Welcome back to the land of the living, spaceman, a familiar, wry voice cut through the fog in my head. My eyes snapped open. Rogus, the human commander. She looked exhausted but wore an undeniably smug grin. Easy there, you're in the medbay. Took a real nasty turn with that lack of oxygen, she continued, her hand hovering over a tangle of archaic, from my perspective, medical equipment. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw. Rogus must have sensed my confusion and handed me a clear cup filled with water. The coolness spread through me like a balm. So, she tilted her head, her dark eyes full of curiosity, are you gonna tell me how in the nine hells a Xylarian of all things ended up drifting on our doorstep? That was a much longer tale, and one I suspected would take a while to unpack. The pod, the malfunction, my desperate efforts, all of it spilled out in a jumbled rush. Rogus listened patiently, occasionally firing off questions. But through it all, one question burned in my mind. Commander, how is it possible for you humans to be this far out? Your technology, it's... I struggled for the right word, primitive. Her grin turned wry. Let's just say us humans have a stubborn fascination with what's out there. And maybe, we don't play by the usual rules. A spark danced in her gaze, and something in that look told me their journey was as extraordinary, in its own way, as mine. There was a tale there, one I intended to tease out. For now, I was alive, among beings vastly different, on the cusp of a truly unexpected adventure. And I couldn't wait to see what the universe held next. My recovery aboard the Artemis was slow. The human doctors were a curious bunch, constantly prodding and poking, taking tissue samples and running them through their clunky, inefficient-looking machines. I humored them, the oddity of being their living, breathing lab specimen strangely appealing. Despite my impatience, their medicine was shockingly effective. Within a few rotations, the constant ache in my chest eased, and my strength returned. Commander Rogus, or Eva as she insisted I call her, became my reluctant guide through the bewildering world of the Artemis. It was cramped and noisy, a far cry from the sleek, efficient designs of Xylarian vessels. Exposed wires snaked through dimly lit corridors, makeshift repairs dotted the hull, and the air held the permanent tang of recycled oxygen and stale sweat. The crew was even more unsettling. They were an eclectic mix of ages and ethnicities that wouldn't be out of place on the busy streets of Xyla, but aboard a ship this far from civilization, it was jarring. And they all shared the unsettling intensity that seemed to burn in Eva's gaze. So, Jax, Eva began one evening as we shared a painfully bland protein meal in the mess hall. We know the lost scout, malfunctioning pod part of your story. But there's more, isn't there? I hesitated, the memory of my panicked transmissions echoing in my mind. To admit my fear felt like exposing a vulnerable underbelly. I was alone, I finally admitted. And for a while, I thought, well, that this would be it. My end. The words felt leaden, a confession against all my training. Eva nodded, not a hint of mockery in her eyes. That kind of fear, well, it has a tendency to make you focus on what's truly important. Something loosened within me. Xylarian efficiency did not allow for dwelling on such anxieties, but out here, surrounded by humans who wore their emotions on their sleeves, I felt an unfamiliar urge to confide. My world. Xyla, I started hesitantly, it values logic and order above all. To lose control, to be adrift, it's the ultimate shame? Eva supplied the word gently. Precisely, I sighed. Here's the thing, out on the edge, that order you guys cling to? It's an illusion. Eva leaned in, the intensity back in full force. We humans, we're at our best in the chaos. We find patterns, solutions, where there should be no hope left. That's the thrill. Her words struck a chord, resonating deep within me. The humans on Artemis did seem fueled by a strange mix of desperation and dogged optimism. It was messy, illogical, and strangely alluring. Over the following rotations, their world opened to me. Eva, somewhat reluctantly, shared bits and pieces of their story. They weren't explorers in the sanctioned sense, but scavengers, she admitted. They sought the ruins of older civilizations. Some whispers called them tomb raiders, but Eva insisted it was preservation, saving scraps of history lost in the vastness of space. It didn't make sense, not in the cold, calculating way I was used to. Yet, their drive was infectious. And slowly, my neatly structured world began to tilt. One shift, Eva called me to the command deck. "Think you're up for some fieldwork, Jax?" she asked, a familiar glint in her eye. Hovering before us was an asteroid field. Not the simple navigational hazard I'd learned about, but a graveyard of a vanished civilization. Broken structures clung to the rocks, faint hints of former technology glinting mournfully. "Readings suggest there might be an intact data core," Eva explained. "Your tech sense is sharper than ours. Want to be my point man for this salvage op?" My Xylarian instincts rebelled. This was reckless, dangerous, bordering on sacrilege. But a different, wilder impulse fled. This was the chaos Eva had spoken of, the chance to touch the past, to find something unique amidst the expanse. "I'm in," I said, the grin catching me by surprise. The salvage op wasn't the sleek, controlled affair of a Xylarian expedition. It was gritty and dangerous, filled with the thrill of the unknown and the ever-present threat of shifting debris and sudden collapses. My Xylarian senses, normally focused on efficiency, were hyper-attuned to the subtle energy signatures and structural flaws invisible to the human scanners. Eva and I worked as one, she, the bold spearhead clearing our path, and I, the quiet eye of the storm, sensing the safest route and the most promising avenues in the maze of ruins. Inside a hollowed-out dome, amidst a mess of corroded metal and shattered crystal, we found it, the data core. It pulsed with a faint luminescence, barely functional, yet a beacon of a forgotten era. Eva's eyes lit up with something akin to reverence, while I felt an unfamiliar pang of awe. This was history, raw and exposed, whispering tantalizing secrets to those who would listen. The extraction was tense, a ballet against a disintegrating structure. I jury-rigged a containment field from salvaged components, fighting the protesting groan of failing power grids. With a final, shuddering jolt, the dome began to crumble. Eva's clipped command, "Jax, go," snapped me out of my frenzy. I sprinted for the shuttle they'd wedged in a crack of the outermost ring. Heart pounding, I managed to scramble in seconds before the decaying dome collapsed entirely, sending chunks of debris hurtling into the blackness. Back on the Artemis, the core flickered in its temporary housing. Eva's crew gathered around, a mix of excitement and weary cynicism painting their faces. "Well, spaceman," Eva smirked, handing me a tool that looked like a crude cousin of our fine-tuned Xylarian scanner, "get to work. Are we looking at a jackpot or a bust?" Hours passed. With tools that felt blunt and clumsy in my hands, I delved into the core's archaic systems, coaxing information out of its decaying circuitry. The information came in fractured bursts, snippets of a star chart, a fading transmission, and what seemed like poetry. It was frustrating, tantalizing, and utterly enthralling. Finally, a breakthrough. The chart came into focus, not an astronomical one, but something entirely different. It traced intricate ley lines across the galaxy, pathways of energy. My pulse quickened. Xylarians had dismissed such things as myth and superstition. But Eva, standing beside me, was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is it, Jax," she hissed. The old whispers spoke of these paths outside of normal space, shortcuts used by civilizations before they even invented space travel the way we know it. "But that's impossible," I stammered. "Exactly why we're out here on the fringe." Eva cut me off. "And if this is real, if there's a network like this." Her gaze turned distant, full of a wild, ambitious light I'd never seen before. Suddenly, my escape pod debacle felt like a sideshow on a far larger stage. The data core held potential that could rewrite the understanding of the universe for both humans and Xylarians. Xyla, with its rigid doctrines and relentless efficiency, seemed very far away. Looking away from the flickering core to Eva, I felt a surge of something new. Was it belonging? Did I find my place among these reckless, star-eyed humans with their battered ship and impossible dreams? And was this feeling, this strange sense of kinship with chaos, perhaps, what it meant to truly be alive in this vast, uncaring universe? News of our discovery spread through the Artemis like wildfire. The crew, usually a mix of jaded sarcasm and weary pragmatism, buzzed with a newfound energy. Eva called a full ship meeting, the first formal gathering I'd witnessed since my arrival. She laid bare their situation with startling honesty. Supplies were dwindling, vital systems on the verge of collapse. They'd taken a gamble venturing this far out, a last roll of the dice. The data core changed everything. The network it held out was a lifeline, the possibility of resupply, repair, or perhaps a way home to Earth, whispered some with moist eyes. But there was a catch. The first ley line node was perilously far off current flight capabilities for the Artemis. It would take a leap of faith and the last of their resources. A murmur swept the assembled crew. The risk was palpable. Failure meant stranding themselves in unexplored territory. It was a desperate gamble, and yet, in their eyes, I saw the same stubborn spark that fueled Eva, that uniquely human mix of desperation and defiance. It was then, faced with their raw, unfettered desire to push onward, that the decision solidified within me. My training, my loyalty to Xyla, even the prospect of rescue and return to my orderly world. All of it paled in comparison to the thrill of the unknown seeping into my bones. I offer my assistance, I announced, my voice ringing with unexpected clarity in the makeshift gathering space. I can help navigate these ley lines, and with my technical knowledge, boost your ship's capabilities for the journey. Stunned silence filled the room. Eva recovered first, a disbelieving laugh escaping her. You? The uptight alien who nearly panicked himself into oblivion? You want to join our suicide run? It is not a suicide run, I countered, feeling an unfamiliar heat rising in my cheeks. It is an exploration, a mission worthy of the risks. We could chart a path, learn secrets the galaxy has forgotten. Together. The crew exchanged glances, then a slow, surprised smile bloomed on the weathered face of their chief engineer. Well, I'll be damned, he chuckled. Got some fire in you yet, Xylarian. Others nodded and grinned, the tension dissolving into a mix of wary acceptance and grudging admiration. Eva's eyes met mine, no trace of mockery, but rather the respect forged through shared danger. In those coming rotations, the Artemis became my lab, my proving ground. I delved into their makeshift systems, finding ingenious solutions born from necessity, a stark contrast to Xylarian refinement. Their crew, initially hesitant, opened up. They taught me the art of patching, repurposing, and the strange kind of resilience gleaned from living on the edge of oblivion. And then came the day we set out. No fanfare, no celebratory send-offs, just the cold vastness and the flickering energy path in the distance, beckoning us onward. I stood beside Eva in the command center, my heart pounding with a mix of Xylarian precision and newly acquired human recklessness. Ready to make history, Jax? Eva gave me her signature lopsided grin. More than ready, I said, meeting her gaze squarely. The rigid structure of my Xylarian past felt like a shed skin, this messy blend of human chaos and my own newfound hunger for the unknown feeling strangely, exhilaratingly right. As the Artemis hurtled into the unknown, a waypoint on a path charted from a forgotten era, I had one certainty: this was no longer just about survival. This was about embracing the unpredictable. I, Xylarian meticulously trained to maintain order, had chosen the exhilarating chaos of the possible.